All right, so this is Yahweh. This is volume 3 of my series that I'm going to entitle The Secret Yahweh Tapes. And I say that not to be overly dramatic. I say that because this is something I'm not going to make publicly available. I'm going to let Vince decide who gets this. He'll probably do some sort of donation routine. But don't charge too much if you do charge. Just enough to cover your costs. I know putting together 9 CDs is not going to be a click of the fingers, but I want to make this available to people who are looking for more of my story. And I think that the reason why a lot of people have been attracted to my story is because it's something very familiar to you on a base level. Maybe not the specifics, but in general, the words that I say, the things that I talk about, ring home with a lot of people. I ended session 2 with speaking about Sun Tzu. Number 4 went to China. He was an expert in military strategy. He's part of the reason that he built a culture on honor and pride in being the most powerful army on earth is ingrained within the culture there. And I think that's part of why now China has become a potential, not danger in the traditional sense, but certainly danger from the aspect of a country like the United States of America who seeks to retain control over the earth. Number 5 was a guy. This was kind of an ambiguous life form, androgynous, I guess would be the term. Hunya, an astrologist from one of the outer worlds. Hunya was sent to Peru. The Incan civilization there flourished for thousands of years. He was very instrumental in the building of and evacuation of Machu Picchu around what would be, I guess, 1400 A.D. Common Era. Hunya was a very interesting individual. You have to understand that astrology in different areas of the galaxy it's a common study, but obviously it looks different depending on the perspective that you are viewing these other things with. Astrology is important and has been studied for a long time because the stars do align to focus certain energies. That's common knowledge on a galactic level. It's something that needs to be understood so that catastrophes can be avoided, for instance. Because the stars and planets have been in motion for billions and billions of Earth years, because of this, we have a good idea when studying them of where they're going to be in the future. And by looking at past patterns of how different galactic alignments influence events within the vortex of the power streams they create, is something that's been studied for millions and millions of years on a galactic level. And Machu Picchu was built from a high vantage point to have a good look at the stars. Nia went there several times. They worked together on several projects as their skill sets lended themselves particularly well to being intertwined. Now, Hunya, when he first came to the Incans, didn't really fit in very well. He's he reminds me a lot of Rasputin, who's somebody I'm going to talk about in later tapes that I knew very well in Russia. Hunya, very eccentric in both his mannerisms, his way of speaking, turned a lot of people off. But it also gained him followers that he was not prepared to lead. Individuals who looked to him for answers that he could not provide. Hunya did a very good job, in particular with the evacuation of Machu Picchu. About 600 years ago, No one's really sure if it was the Greys or not. I believe it was the Greys, but we all know what I think of their race. About 600 years ago, Machu Picchu was enveloped with what was later determined to be radioactive energy, and people were getting sick, and they were dying up there. And Machu Picchu had been erected because it was kind of the capstone of the Incan Empire, the pinnacle of their success, both figuratively and literally, at the top of the mountain. And Hunya was so giving of himself during that whole process. 90% of the inhabitants made it out of Machu Picchu in the year some odd long evacuation process, which is no small feat. Also, because of the terrain involved, for a city that large, tens of thousands of people. The smaller suburbs, the shanty towns, if you will, that existed around Machu Picchu, the service industry folk, is something that is not retained after 600 years of wear and tear on the top of the mountain for us to look at today. But it was a very large cultural icon in those days. I get asked a lot about number 6. Awa was the name. Awa was someone that was very difficult to understand in a lot of similar fashion to number 3. To look here, Awa was sent here to Earth. His job was to go up north to what was then the Viking kingdoms and teach them some civility. They were, in our team's view, barbaric culture in a lot of regard, and didn't understand their potential for good on the planet. Awa was by trade a scout. When a new world would be not discovered is not an accurate term. When a new world would be explored, Awa was one of the individuals who was part of a team that would go there. He was very used to living in solitude in extreme conditions, an expert in survival, in making do with what was around him. He was sent up north, very large individual, by traditional terms, very handsome, very rugged, blonde hair, blue eyes, probably, I don't know, well above 6 feet. I don't think he was 7 feet, but right between 6-7 feet, very muscular, and just gave almost an intimidating air about him when you were around him. But as you got to know Awa, you realized that because of all these years spent in solitude, he had forgotten how to communicate with people one-on-one. He used to joke with us during our training that this was the most time he'd spent with anyone since he was very young. I went to Russia originally looking for Awa. I had heard legends, I guess, of a Viking god who, could smite enemies with one fell swoop and crazy things. They at first sounded fanciful, like a lot of things you'll hear being said around the globe. But there was also a hint of familiarity to some of them that made me think sometimes of Awa. Now, I believe now that he was the forefather of the Inuit peoples, the Aboriginal people of northern Canada. I spent a lot of time in Siberia over the years and saw what I believe to be his influence, his way of conducting business, influence in that culture. But he was an individual who craved solitude. He'd become so used to being by himself that being around, especially large groups of people, really messed with him. And I'll have more to say about what I found out about Awa in subsequent tapes. But at number 7, of course, was me, Yajweh. I was plucked from my studies by the 7th Emperor of Nibiru because I have the ability to step back, so to speak, and see both sides. I've done a lot of negotiating. I've been an arbitrator in several large disagreements over the years, and I feel like my track record speaks for itself. I feel like in a lot of ways the fact that this planet is still functioning to some extent is due in large part to the work that I've done over the years. Obviously, most of it has been done behind the scenes. With what's coming up, Satan, a guy that's, I think he's Swedish or Australian, that gets a hold of top secret information and puts it on the internet. And I expect that I will be named if they release U.S. consulate cables, perhaps by name, if not by description. And it concerns me because I do not want credit for a lot of what I've done. And the reason I don't want credit is because the people who have taken credit, the people who have been allowed to stand in the limelight and receive the kudos, people need leaders. They need to feel like their leaders have their best interest at heart, and most do. I can tell you that from firsthand experience. And I don't seek that kind of attention here on earth. My reward for what I'm doing will be given to me when I complete what it is I was sent here to do. And that is the purpose of these tapes. That's why I want to record me explaining what it is I'm here to do, what it is I've done, and what it is I plan on doing over the next couple of years as the people of Earth are given the opportunity to join the galactic community, of which they are already a part. They just don't know it yet. They're finding out. And I was an expert, like I say, in kind of, I always say interstellar anthropology because that's the field I studied, and I was fascinated by different cultures, and in particular ancient rituals throughout the galaxy. But I was chosen because in class, both Yeshua and I were able to sometimes quell disagreements as they came up amongst our group, and the 7th Emperor noticed this. He commented on it several times that I would be good at politics because of this, but that is a field for which I have no taste. Now, number 8 was sent to Africa. Number 8 was an anthropologist like me. He was strictly a cultural anthropologist. He was sent to Timbuktu. That was where he landed, so to speak. Namo. And Namo existed for a long time in Africa with what is now referred to as the Dogon tribe. Namo had studied so much culture in his career because when he reached our level at university, he had been in his field for a long time. In Earth year equivalents, it would be hundreds of years maybe. And he knew a lot about different cultures, and he was very vocal. He was a very in-your-face, I'm going to tell you what I think type of individual who would tell people in no uncertain terms that in order for cultures to be successful long-term, they had to figure out balance and how to live in harmony with themselves, with those around them, with their surroundings, Mother Nature, so to speak. Everything had to be kept in harmonious balance, and it could be done by following a few simple rules. And we were all sent to work on instructing the people we were sent to in some sort of what you would now term as religion. We always spoke of it as the way of thinking. We want to change the way of thinking. We want to elevate the people here on Delta Soul to a higher plane so that they are ready to receive the knowledge that's available to them. And Namo was very good at explaining this with story, with personal experience. Because he'd studied so many different types of cultures, he could almost instantly find the little nuance quirks with the people, the respective group that he was speaking with, and almost tailor suit his words to what they wanted to hear. Not what they wanted to hear, but what would be most pleasing to them, the most pleasing way for him to explain what he was saying in their dialect. Namo was very good at that. And societies that have existed over the years in Africa, many that went underground, literally underground, when the slave trade started hundreds of years ago, and have found a peaceful existence underneath the sands of the Sahara. And then number 9, of course, was Yeshua, who many of you called Jesus. Yeshua was always instantly, you could tell, charismatic, eloquent, a very good orator. Yeshua was the one who you felt this passion emanating from him, this love, this warmth, this I only have good feelings for you vibe that he emanated. It made everyone feel at ease when he was in the room. He was I say he again. Yeshua is not one sex or the other. Yeshua's species doesn't procreate that way. Yeshua's species long, long ago became aware of an ancient ritual they call Nongai, that people enter a trance, sometimes for years at a time, to go into the Akashic record. They seek balance. They seek to create, to go back and make amends for past transgressions, to go forward and strive for a better future by laying the groundwork, by laying out the roadmap for others. And in the present, they seek to, in an orderly fashion, catalog what they perceive as coming in a way that others will later best understand it. It's no secret that Jesus sometimes spoke in parables. That was his way of communicating most things, was to tell you something that not just you knew what he was trying to tell you because you always did, almost always, but because he would tell you in such a way that you would never forget it. It would stick with you. And he was the most interested of all of us in the Emperor's idea to bring the idea of religion to the peoples of Earth. This idea that there was a rhyme and reason. We were making it up as we went along at first. And then it became very, very clear to all of us that the unknowables that we had learned about at university, we were explaining, at first completely winging it. We were explaining to the people of Earth in a way that they were understanding, that it was sticking with them. They were changing the basis point from which they make all their decisions, many of them, based on this simple concept that there is something beyond this life. By planting that seed of knowledge that we are all part of the same spring of life, within humans, it's allowed to grow because humans have hard-coded, hardwired into your brains this gnawing thought of, why am I here? Is there a reason for all this? I'm going to take a quick break. I've got to drink some Kool-Aid. So there we are in school, in class, and who is now the 7th Emperor of Nibiru, who then was just our classmate. A group of individuals of the Anunnaki came in. The Anunnaki are very intimidating. They are, even by someone of my standards, who is very comfortable in most surroundings, the Anunnaki are a very ancient, very well-respected, very elegant species of beings. I get upset when people refer to them as reptilian. I've heard that before. They're not lizards. They're humanoid. They don't look that much different than you humans. But the Anunnaki are very intimidating because to be an Anunnaki, your upbringing, your first 7 years of life take place away from your family in special schools that are designed to not allow you to forget the neural pathways you're born with. Those are nurtured. They use an incredible amount of their brains. The Anunnaki are very smart. They are not empathic. They are not telepathic, but they're very close to it. Just in the fashion that it's very difficult to, if one of the Anunnaki wants something from you, wants you to do something, and they're standing face to face with you, it's very difficult to say no. And I speak from personal experience. There have been times that I have been reluctant to complete the task to which I was assigned, and I've made the argument this is not what I signed up for. And I've been told, I guess in a nutshell, I've been told to shut up and do my job if I want to get home. And I do want to get home, and I will do my job. But a group of the Anunnaki came in. It must have been some sort of council or priesthood. They were dressed pretty elaborately. And we were not asked to leave. We were told to kneel. And we kind of at that point knew what was going on. They said the 6th Emperor of Nibiru had passed on into the Akashic Record to be reborn again on another planet some other time. They have a speech that they give. It's actually quite touching. It basically says that this individual is no longer with us, but their soul goes on, and when we remember that soul, never really detaches itself from us on a spiritual level, as long as we keep remembering the people that we have lost. And I think about that often. As someone who has lived a long time on this planet, I've seen a lot of good people pass away. And it's never easy. And I find comfort in that thought, that their soul goes on. And as long as I remember them, we are still connected. And we do still, quote unquote, know each other on that spiritual base level. But the council came in, and we were told the 6th Emperor had passed away into the Akashic Record. And at that point, they gave the formal introduction of the 7th Emperor of Nibiru, whose names cannot be spoken, blah, blah, blah. And it was not 10 minutes, Earth equivalent, 10 minutes later, that our professor had the other 9 of us off in her office while they were going through some swearing-in ceremony. It wasn't swearing in. It's implied that he's going to take on these duties. It was a coronation, or so I guess would be the word. she told us that she and Emperor Seven had this idea years ago that if this had ever happened, that they would like to form a party, a group to go to Delta Sol to get the people of that planet ready for integration into the community of our galaxy. And that because the Sixth Emperor's health had been in such state of decline, they had invited, we thought our grades had earned us a spot in the class. We had been specifically chosen. And that the Emperor was going to make us a proposition. And moments later, he walked in, shut the door, the professor left. It was the 10 of us in that room. And it was the gravity of that situation. I'm going to try to do my best to describe it. He looked at each one of us in a way that I've never been looked at before or since. Deep down, you felt grabbing your soul, as if you were to grab a man by his testicles and pull him close to you to tell him something. That's what it felt like. And he said to each one of us at once, but individually, I have chosen each one of you to be a member of my expedition to Delta Sol. For years, my people have been using these people as slave labor to extract gold, a resource of reasonable abundance on their world. We have given them technology and information that has helped them grow, but they have never shown themselves to be able to manage this information, this technology in a responsible manner. So they've never been allowed to join the community of worlds in our galaxy. And I, as the 7th Emperor of Nibiru, want to take on this challenge with this planet who is so symbiotic, I believe was the word he said, with Nibiru. Emperor 7 firmly believes, people, that it is the future, the past, present, and future of Nibiru and Earth are intertwined now, and they always have been, and they always will be. The difference with what he was proposing was he wanted to change the dynamic of the relationship that his people had with those on Earth. And he briefly then explained to us kind of a backdrop of how his particular house, of which he was the 7th Emperor, had been involved in the history that we knew of the planet Earth. And I'll get more into that as these volumes go on. But he gave us an opportunity, literally of a lifetime, to have, for someone like me, who desperately wanted to study one of the newer worlds, to put my name on something that no one else had yet investigated. It was an amazing opportunity. And what he said was that we were going to bring to Earth this context of religion. We were going to plant 9 seeds, each one of us, those respective seeds, around the planet. And his hope was that at least one of those seeds would grow and spread. And by the time of the next ascension, that we would be able to communicate with the people of Earth on a similar level to which his house was speaking with other planets with which they had dealings. That might not be a very good explanation. Prince and Vince both just shook their heads, kind of like, what? That just went over our heads. I'll try to explain better. The 7th Emperor wanted to change the face of Nibiru that was recognized by the rest of the galaxy. The sixth emperor was, as I've said before, an awful, cruel leader. The stuff that happened on Nibiru, just like in any society that you look back on as totalitarian or tyrannical, for the most part, people obeyed the laws, and the laws didn't, those enforcing the laws, rather, didn't have much contact with the common person. The sixth emperor was a very vindictive leader who punished his political enemies, his subjects too, but in different ways. He spent a lot of the empire's resources during his reign on basically buying extravagant things from other worlds that he could not produce on his own, and transferring the wealth that had been built up by generations off-world. And the seventh emperor's idea was to bring that wealth back. And the way he wanted to do that was by again establishing Nibiru as the hub of culture in the galaxy. Instead of being looked at as this orderly but fascist society, he instead wanted Nibiru to be looked at as a progressive culture, a progressive society, a progressive planet. And by showing what he was able to do with Earth, the folks, Delta Sol is known by a lot of species around the galaxy, a lot of races around the galaxy. Humans are thought of, in most terms in textbooks, as an underdeveloped bipedal hominoid species that uses a very small percentage of their brain and is prone to bouts of imbalance. And the translation for that would be people are prone to sin. Humans are prone to sin is what we not looked at it as, is the way we talked about it. People have the disposition to want more of a good thing, oftentimes through any means necessary. Being selfish sometimes is thought of as, being greedy, being selfish. Gluttony is thought of as being successful in certain societies on Earth. And the ones with whom the Anunnaki had dealings, the ancient families on Earth, who abused their people, much like the sixth emperor had done by just using them for labor and as a supplier of means to the end. The seventh emperor said, I want the people of Earth to have a chance to speak for themselves. I believe they will trade and supply my planet as they always have done, freely and openly. We will be able to replenish the coffers of Nibiru with what we are able to bring about in trade, I guess would be the Earth equivalent. There is money in a galactic sense. I don't know if I've ever been asked that one before. There is money. It's not paper money, of course. It's not metal. It's not fictitious zeros and ones bouncing around in a computer in Geneva, I'll tell you that. It's more of a bartering system. A system where honor and ethics reign supreme. It's why the menacing Greys have been so successful in a galactic sense. They're great purveyors of a wide variety of things that you couldn't even begin to imagine at this point. But Nibiru, because of its cultural significance from a galactic standpoint, and because of its very close proximity to Earth, Nibiru is a prime liaison as Earth is brought in. And Earth is a pretty large planet on a galactic scale. Most planets that support life in the galaxy, and I say most, have magnetic fields similar to Earth. They have hard iron nickel cores, and then a liquid subcenter, and then a hard crust, a cooled crust on the outside with volcanic activity, much like Earth. These planets vary greatly in size, but Earth is about as large as you can get without going to the next class of planet. And when I say most planets have magnetic fields, the reason I say most is that some planets do not rotate in a traditional sense. Their gravity comes from their mass, not from their rotation. And the gravity is typically much greater than planets like Earth. So we were presented this project and asked if we would like to participate. And not one of us, I don't think any of us hesitated at all. We said, of course we would love to do this. Are you kidding? This is the opportunity we've all been looking for. When do we start? And it was explained that we would go to Nibiru, we would go to the palace on Nibiru. We would, within the palace, we would be given a certain section that was to be specifically designed for our training on Earth. And the palace on Nibiru is about the size of a large city. And the area that we occupied was, when I went to the Vatican City, I thought this is very similar to the area of the palace on Nibiru that we completed our training. There were several different teachers, each of whom had spent considerable time on Earth at different times, different cultures, which I found fascinating, of course. But yeah, my colleagues as well asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of questions, and we were given a lot of answers. I'm not going to try to go back and say everything we asked and everything we were told, but suffice it to say, within the passing on the base knowledge of the day is this long, the equivalent of Earth 24 hours is what this is to you. Their years are this long. There is a lunar satellite that has a cycle of X many days, things like that, the basic stuff that you would know, the different makeup of your atmosphere, the different rates at which certain elements appear in your atmosphere and in your the ground here. Water was a very big, exciting prospect for us. There are very few planets within the galaxy that have as much water as Earth does. You see Earth represented in art throughout the galaxy as a large blue and white sphere. People have for a long time thought that Earth was, because Earth would always change because of the clouds and the different things going on Earth, that Earth was a beautiful planet to look at. And I think that's very unusual, because right now on Earth I run into so many people who are astronomers who are using all their resources with their telescopes, the radio telescopes, and the microwave telescopes, and trying to see, Hubble with trying to see back in time, they call it. And it's always kind of amusing to me, because I think of all the different stories I heard of different planets looking at Earth. And what would these people think, who are so desperately seeking some kind of extraterrestrial proof? They want proof in their conventional terms. to know that somebody is looking back at them. And that's what was going on. The earth was always a prime target of the Anunnaki. I found out during my training that the Anunnaki had been involved in custom gene coding different races around Earth. There's a story in the Bible about the Tower of Babel and people building a tower trying to reach God, and God striking them down and giving them all different languages. And that is spawned in its roots from what the Anunnaki did after the end of the Fourth Age. The Anunnaki decided that people on Earth would do better if they had to find different ways to communicate with each other. And in retrospect, it was an ingenious idea. People did find different ways to communicate, to get their ideas across. It's interesting, if you're in an argument with somebody, your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, parent, co-worker, whoever, try having an argument via email. I know that's hard in this day and age when everything's tracked and retained and your words can be used against you. But try having a disagreement via email. Here's why. You have to think about what you're going to type. Sometimes you may even read it back to yourself and make changes. The other person can't interrupt your email. They can't interrupt you. You type out that paragraph. They can interrupt in their mind and not read it, but you've said your piece. The different races around the globe were tracked, I guess, for lack of a better term, by the Anunnaki. After this, each one genetically altered, certain members of those races genetically altered to change the bloodlines. Natural selection is just common sense. If I genetically alter someone who lives up north to be less susceptible to the cold, their heirs are probably going to propagate more than someone who is susceptible to the cold. If I engineer someone to be immune to a certain virus that is prevalent in a certain area, everybody else will die out, and those that have those genetics will live. Sounds cruel, but from the Anunnaki standpoint, humans at the time were looked at as animals are by humans today. In a lot of ways, as just something over which they had dominion. And they didn't need to treat them as sentient beings. Now, humans had served the Anunnaki for a long time. I don't know exactly how long. I believe that it was back into the Third Age. And the Anunnaki, I would assume, have the records. But we were learning so much about where we were going, what was going on at the time, what we were going there to do, that we didn't have as much time as certainly I would have liked to learn more about the ancient histories of this planet, of Delta Sol. And I wish that I would have, because being on this planet for 3,500 years, that would have bought me a lot of dinners. I would have got a lot of free dinners off those stories. And I say that only half jokingly. There are places on Earth where food and common comforts are so scarce that having someone invite you into their home and give you a cup of broth or a piece of bread changes you on a spiritual level. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times I believe myself and people go through their existence on autopilot. You're kind of coasting along and you forget that phrase that you stop and smell the roses. You forget all the little nice things that are being done for you and to you on a day-to-day, day and moment-by-moment basis by those around you, and hopefully that you're doing as well. And it's okay to be unconscious of those 99.9% of the time, because that's how you exist. But once in a while, it's so nice to stop and just be in the comfort of other souls, and giving from your heart. When you really give, the Christmas season is coming up, and Vince, I would like to send you a series. I'll try to break them up, on the real Christmas story. People would really, I think, benefit from hearing it. How much time have we got on this one? Halfway? No, 45. Okay. Let's see, where was I? So we were gathered together. We were given our training. We were together, all 9 of us, day in, day out, for a year approximate in Earth equivalent time. And it's amazing how close you get to know strangers when you're in those tight surroundings for that long. There were disagreements. Not one of us, I think there's not a single one of us, except for maybe Yeshi, who didn't disagree at some point in time with one of the others, sometimes vehemently. We always, though, understood. We were all intelligent enough to understand that what we were doing required not just, luck and knowledge and certain skill sets. What we were doing also would require great perseverance and great patience. And afterwards, we realized that was what Emperor 7 had in mind when he sent us to this area of the palace, that all of our comfort needs were met, except for when we were going through training for how to get by on very little sustenance. But we were not allowed to associate with anyone. The people who brought us food and took care of us, so to speak, they never spoke. We very rarely saw them. I read a book about a boy wizard called Harry Potter, and they had little house elves or something. Dobby, I think, was his name, and no one ever saw him or knew he was around. And it reminded me of these service individuals in the palace, and the sneaky way with which they conduct their day-to-day business. I don't know what kind of training they go through. I'm not going to say they make themselves invisible, but it's amazing how something can blend into the wood, so to speak, so easily. So we were there for about a year, and we went through training on every aspect of what it is to be human. We were shown what would be the equivalent of video presentations on every aspect of human life. And the people who were brought in to speak with us, who had lived on Delta Sol for some time, some of their stories were very discomforting to us. We had heard of, certain cultures who were barbaric, who practiced sacrifice and eating of one another, cannibalism, something that we could hardly fathom at the time. It seemed so just sick and wrong to us on a base level. And they were preparing us for living with savages. That's what we viewed the people of Earth as, all of us, when we were ready to leave, was savages. Not in a bad way, not as we hate you, as you know nothing. We can't hold you accountable for anything because you don't know any better. You're like a small child or an animal. You act based on, instinctual reaction patterns, not with conscious forethought. And each one of us, as we got here, we were told this, but we were also told so many stories of people following madness to ends that were unfathomably unconscionable. People doing horrible things to other human beings in the name of their leader or what they perceived at the time as a god. And why did they do this? The folks that instructed us didn't have an answer. That was our question. Why? Help us understand this. We can't. That was part of our assignment, was to get here and try to understand what was going on, try to blend in, try to fit in, and gradually start to plant these seeds that, hey, there's a reason why you have to be good to one another. Because at the end of the road, we all take a left turn and start again. And by doing this, the people of earth were then going to go about their daily routines in a more happy manner. One time I heard a quote by Lenin, Vladimir, that religion was the opiate of the masses. And I thought it was very apropos, because religion really does numb the senses, hopefully in a good way. It's what myself and my 8 colleagues strive to do when we came here. We wanted to, with each of our respective assignments, instill positive seeds of thought in those respective cultures. With the Mayans were, at the time, doing things. An example would be, they would cut someone open, spill out their insides, and based on how those entrails laid out on the floor of the priest's chamber, try to predict the future. Neya came there and showed them, through the logic of mathematics and astronomy, that there was no benefit in what they were doing, and indeed changed many of the cultural sacrificial rituals that the Mayans had. When Tifi went to the Egyptians, the pharaohs, when they chose genetic manipulation by the Anunnaki, they did so because the people of Egypt was not like it is now. It wasn't this barren desert, but it was still a very difficult place in which to live. And the pharaohs very much wanted to develop their society. They didn't want people to be afraid of them. They wanted people to work for them because they could supply them with food and drink and something to worship. They were proto-gods, culturally speaking, on this planet, because they created within their subjects the belief construct that the pharaoh was above me on an existence plane. I'm here. He's a different being up there above, one that maybe I could someday aspire to be like, if not be. And Tifi calmed their egos down enough to where the Egyptians eventually relinquished control over that which did not belong to them. The ancient families of Egypt still exist today. Yes, I know that's difficult to understand, but the ancient families of Egypt, some of them still live in Egypt, most of them live elsewhere, but they still exist today. And the reason I believe that they were able to break their hold on this one specific people, and I have personal experience on this with Moses, as I will get into later, but the reason I believe that Egypt changed its paradigm over the years was because of Tifi's influence. And Locaire, when he went to Atlantis, he did what he could. Those folks were hell-bent on destroying the world just to see what was on the other side. And he did a lot of good in France, especially with the Templar. The Knights Templar they were not and are not good people. It's a sick secret society made up of religious zealots for the most part and lemmings for the rest. Locare was able to keep a lid on Europe for centuries. Sun Tzu going to China and creating, without using a central deity, creating a system of thought through Confucianism and Taoism, the Eastern philosophies, all stem from Sun Tzu. And his book, The Art of War, one of the most influential pieces of literature in the history of the world. It's hard for some to imagine The Art of War as a religious text, but when you read it, think about it. It very much is. All of our teachings center on balance and on understanding your quote-unquote enemy and your quote-unquote allies to achieve what you want, which, correct me if I'm wrong, for all beings that I've ever come across, is to make it through till tomorrow in as good a way as possible. Now, Hunya, the astrologist, went to Peru. At the time, the Incans were very highly developed as a society. Their system of governance was one that kept very few records. They didn't have to. Most of their traditions were passed down orally. Fascinating to study from a cultural standpoint. But what Hunya was able to do there was Hunya was able to let them see that their, and thank goodness that he did this, they didn't have to all function as an autocratic, coming from one place society. They could break up. It would be almost the equivalent with what happened to the Incans, is if the United States of America, because of all the trouble it's going through, the different states decided, okay, guys, it's been a nice ride, as all of us as 50 United States, but we're going to break up, and some of us are going to go this way, some of us are going to go that way. We're not going to be enemies. We're just going to be independent entities and rule ourselves. And that's a lot what happened with the Incan Empire. And Hunya, because he had this just knack at being able to tell cool stories and explain things in such a way that it made sense to a lot of people, was able to assist in that transformation, in the breakup of the South American macro culture that existed for a long time. It wasn't a bad thing to break it up. It was actually a good thing. They'd become so centralized and in areas so condensed that it was a strain on their resources, on their infrastructure. Poverty and there were areas that were subject to famine and drought, whereas people existing in smaller communities were more easily sustained by that which was around them. And Awa, when Awa came here, number 6, he went up north. We understood that it was the Viking culture that he was going to try to change. They were the ones that we were all kind of afraid. We were glad Awa took that, because he was probably the most physically and mentally tough of all of us. And Awa took that assignment and went up north, and we don't know if he ever did anything or not. It's really funny. You look and you say, well, have any great global catastrophes stemmed from any of the northern peoples? No. So by that measure, yes, he did do his job. As far as what did he do to do his job, none of us are very specific on that. Me, you have to look at the timer. Yeah, you guys. Okay, 20. All right. Me, I was sent to the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization. It would have been about 1500 BCE. I lived on Crete for about 5 years before the great catastrophe hit. Crete was, the Minoan civilization was fascinating to me. It was the one I begged and pleaded for. And it's funny because, in retrospect, the Minoans, a lot of the ancient Greco-Roman history that I was a part of. In a sense of how it affected the world, it's pretty big, but how it affected me is very small. I went after Crete, after the disaster. I went to Jerusalem, which at the time was controlled by the Egyptians. And I lived in Jerusalem for many years, until I actually was there for, let me figure this out, it would have been a little over, I guess, 100 years before I went and assisted with Moses in Egypt. And subsequently, I assisted in Judaism, I guess, in creating Judaism. That's why I am used right now in my respective capacity as a liaison between the community of Islam and the Judeo-Christian community of the West, is because I can explain the similarities better than anyone. I can explain what makes us one better than my opponents can try to argue what divides us. And so far I've been wildly successful. And I only say wildly successful because you don't have any idea how many times war has been narrowly averted in the Middle East. There's a lot of competing interests there. There's a lot of people who see the Middle East as the last stop on the rung down the ladder of human beings. I think maybe the only area of the globe that's been treated more poorly would be sub-Saharan Africa. And that leads me, I guess, Namo went to Africa as a cultural anthropologist, and when he got to Timbuktu, he got lost for several years just reading there, is what he told me was, just reading. It's funny because Nefertiti, or Tifi, and Namo worked together on all kinds of different projects over the years. Nefertiti's big claim to fame was she came to the birth of Jesus along with me. She was at the time posing as a Bedouin sheep herder. She dressed as a man. She wore a scarf over her face, and I played along. The quote-unquote angel Gabriel had told me what was going on before we got there, and I played along. And she, as well as Namo, taught me a lot over the years, because the societies in Africa that have gone literally underground are very, very ancient. They rely heavily on oral tradition. And oral tradition, because it's involved a lot with rituals, is something that I'm obviously very fascinated in. And Tifi and Namo, both living in Africa all those years in various parts, really showed me that there is, anthropologically speaking, that Earth is a rich tapestry of culture, one that should be preserved going forward into the assimilation with the rest of the worlds in the galaxy, not changed, not thrown out and replaced with this kind of homogenized culture that a lot of the new worlds get subject to when they're brought in, because there's so much information being poured on them at once that they almost look for, well, how do I act? Oh, look, there's the people that poured this on us. I'm going to look to them for leadership or try to mimic how they act. I hope that there's a way to retain the various cultures around the earth as all this happens. I say that sincerely. And Tifi, did so much over the years to preserve these old stories. Namo did too, but Namo did it because he didn't do it and publicize them, I guess. He did it for his own archival purposes. He would send them back home and, make his reports like everybody else did. But Tifi really tried to do things in a way that would get the word out. The whole book of Matthew in the New Testament is Tifi's relaying this. Hey, did you hear about this? Did you hear about it? And Tifi was in any capacity very persuasive. And then, of course, Yeshua, with Christianity. I don't know if there's anything I really even need to say about that, because I am choosing Yeshi to come back with me on this mission that I'm embarking on. And I just looked at the clock. I'm going to have about 10 minutes left. I don't want to spend the last 10 minutes talking about why I chose Yeshua, because I could have chosen any of my peers, and they're all very well qualified to do this with me. And I feel very humbled and honored that I was chosen as the one of the 9 to do this. It was my idea. I did spearhead the project, so I do feel entitled to this to some extent, but I also feel very humbled that the Emperor chose me. And the reason I chose Yeshua was in part by the correspondence given to me through Vince and through others from people who had heard the options. So many people want Yeshua to come back. They want the second coming of their Christ. There's another side to that coin, the Antichrist, that's in your mythology, that does exist. And it has nothing to do with Yeshua. It's not his brother or his, evil twin. The Antichrist, as you deem this person, is someone who can take the shape or form of either of your sexes, and indeed has done so very recently. The last time I saw this individual, your Antichrist just may be a Mrs., a she. And I hesitate right now to say who I believe the biblical equivalent of the Antichrist is on this planet right now. And the reason I hesitate to say that is because Yeshua, when I pick him and when he gets here, the first thing he's going to tell me is that as long as he and I are working together, I have to understand that he cannot operate from a dynamic of any kind of spite or any kind of negativity. It's not the space within which Yeshua can function. To bring that myth up to him, to say, there's this, since you've been gone, he knows what's been written about him. He knows what's been done in his name. And he knows that this old legend from our world is being used somehow in connection with him. It tears him up. It tears him up because he feels like his coming back now has this associated with it as prophecy. And prophecy is dangerous territory for any being. Prophecy involves going into the Akashic record, looking at a fuzzy gray picture of what is to come, and coming back and without having the actual details, filling those in to the best of your ability. And there have been those who have been good at it and those who haven't. But this idea that Yeshua is attached somehow to this individual that you will call the Antichrist is very difficult for him to deal with. I'll let him speak for himself, but I can tell you as his friend that it's very troubling to him. And the one who you will begin to call the Antichrist is not human. This species of which she is a member comes from an area of the galaxy that is very dark, is very quiet. They've existed for thousands and thousands of years, each one of them in perfect solitude. Much like number 6, their species branched off from number 6's long ago to go and live in the caves on some of the inner planets. Very old, like me. But I live on a planet of warm light. They live out of reach of anything like light or warmth that we would think of in a traditional sense. And even talking about it, I've had to ask them now to pause a couple of times. I'm going to finish out tape 3 with this. There's things that I wish I could explain better. This is one of them. The polar dynamic with which I view the one you will call the Antichrist and my friend Yeshua troubles me deeply. Because if it is prophecy that is about to come true, then I guess it's up to me to do more than I had bargained for. And it's a stunning realization for someone who is at the end of a very long road to find out there is yet another hill over the horizon. I don't want to be down, though. I want to finish my 3rd volume on a positive note. And so I'm going to tell you a story of when I was a little boy. My father took me to a grove of trees on my home world and asked me to pick the one that I felt was the oldest. And some were large and some were small. Most were very, very tall. And as I looked around, I noticed that one of the trees, its roots almost seemed to reach out and touch all of the other trees. As I tried to trace each one as if through a maze, each one of its roots seemed to touch another tree. And I asked my father, is this the tree? Is this the oldest tree in this grove? And he said no. And he pointed to what looked to me almost like a sapling on the ground. And he said, this tree is very ancient. It never grew because it realized at a young age that it, in this existence, had done all it needed to do. And now it was time for it just to be a tree. I love that story because sometimes when I think things are too much or too crazy, I think about that story. I think about my father's words of wisdom. I think about how I looked and immediately my mind went to the largest, the most visibly obvious suspect. When in reality it was something completely different. The answer was right in front of me. And this little tree, I don't know how old it was, but when I looked at it that second time, it was very obvious, very obviously very old. And you could see emanating from its branches the spirit of life. That was the first time in my life I saw what you would call angels. And that's a big reason why, when the Emperor asked me to join this team and come to Earth, that I agreed to do that. Because there is such a thing as God. The ones do exist. And